And just like that, there are 26 remaining in the camp roster as the Hurricanes stayed busy on Tuesday assigning 13 players to the Chicago Wolves and released some PTO guys from their contracts. Who's going to Chicago? Who's now trying to find a new home for their team? And where do the Carolina Hurricanes stand right now as we're just a few more days away from the last preseason game against the Nashville Predators?
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkers, also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. On the Wednesday show of the pod, we're going to be going over the 8 guys that were assigned to the Chicago Bulls for the Carolina Hurricanes who don't have to go through waivers, but we will also talk about the 5 guys who have to go through waivers to hopefully get reassigned to the Chicago Wolves. And then after that, what's kind of left for the 26 guys who are going to be fighting for the actual 23 roster spots for the Hurricanes. But before we jump into all of the trimmed roster and the cuts and all of that stuff, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, we all know on Sunday and Monday, the Carolina Hurricanes made some roster moves of sending, the goalies back on Sunday for 2 of them there. Then we had another 5 leave on Monday. And you kind of knew as the week was probably going to progress that the Hurricanes were going to have to make more roster cuts because by next Monday, those are when opening night rosters should be finalized. So the Hurricanes have about a few days left until Monday because we have the last preseason game on Saturday, and then by Monday they got to make sure that their 23-man rosters kind of sent in. So you kind of thought, okay, maybe we'll go through the week, might be some cuts here and there, and stuff like that. But in reality, the Hurricanes decided, no, we're just going to do a mass exodus of guys and get them all assigned to the Chicago Wolves because the Wolves also started their training camp on Monday. And with the fact that they already had, a few guys already go for the first day, day 2 started out, you already kind of knew some of the guys that were heading down there. And then all of a sudden, all right, here's the announcement of more guys heading to Chicago in the AHL. So the 8 players who are just going outright to the American Hockey League don't have to go through waivers. Nikita Kwat, Bradly Nadeau, Justin Robidoux, Ivan Rybkin, Gleb Shriktsov, Felix Ungerstrom, Bryce Montgomery, and Joel Nystrom. So depending on their age, how many years they have left until of signing an NHL contract, how many games they have to play to stay within the exemption list, all these guys don't meet the criteria of having to go through waivers. They can just be outright assigned to Chicago, so they're already going down. They don't have to worry about going through waivers and all that stuff. And it's interesting when you look at Bradly Nadeau because you saw throughout rookie showcase, training camp, and so in the first 5 preseason games, you kind of feel like he was one of those guys that might stay around a bit longer, maybe go 6 for 6 in preseason games and might have a legitimate shot to maybe make a case to make the Hurricanes roster. Unfortunately, not the case. He's one of the few guys, part of that initial 8 that don't have to go through waivers. You can go right to Chicago and all that stuff. And it made you wonder, like, okay, so what are we looking at for Nadeau and, how the Hurricanes and more importantly, head coach Rod Brind'amour think about it? Well, this is what Rod Brind'amour said after, the roster cuts in practice on Tuesday, talking about Bradly Nadeau going to Chicago. It's tough because, we'd love to keep him here, but we also have to figure out what makes sense. You can see we have lots of forwards, so it wouldn't really make sense at this point with the way the schedule worked out. We'd rather keep him going and keep him playing. Plus, he's developing really well. We'll obviously keep our eye on him. He did everything he needed to do. And then one of the follow-up questions was about, will he be considered as a first call-up option? Brind'amour said, it just depends on the kinds of call-up. It has to be the right fit. We don't want to call him up to play 6 minutes per night. It depends on where we're at. Obviously, he's a high-end player for us, and we love how he's progressing. So the fact that Rod Brind'amour loves what Bradly Nadeau's done. He's basically done everything the Hurricanes have asked for him, because one of the main things coming into camp, and of course, you've heard me talk about it. You heard Mike Maniscalco talked about it last week, and I've mentioned Ryan Henkel, who's also talked about it. You kind of want to, you don't want to rush these guys, but you also, we know Nadeau can score, but the question is, can he do all the stuff without the puck? Can he find the right space? Does he know the play? Does he know the read? Does he know where he needs to be in his spot on the ice within the system? Can he back check, be physical, do on the PK, all that stuff? Because we all know he can score goals. His shot is NHL level, but does he have the intangibles off puck to make him a guy that will work in the NHL? Because everyone who's a high-end scorer can score goals, but can you do the other stuff to give yourself the opportunities to score? If you're not putting yourself in the right spot, you're not going to give yourself an opportunity to get passes from teammates or find the right read or find the right shot to put the puck on the net. So it's what can you do without the puck? And that's kind of the main thing. And he did that. And he had legitimately 4 goal scorer goals, but his last one got taken off because of offside, because of course we have to do coaches challenges in the preseason. But either way, regardless of it was taken off the board, that was still a really good goal from him. And you feel like this is what you're looking at when you're looking at a guy like Bradly Nadeau. So that was kind of surprising. He was one of those guys that had to kind of be ushered out already going to Chicago, and not part of possibly the, going into the 6th preseason game. Does make it very, very interesting. Now, talking about, looking at some other guys, Ivan Radkin kind of showed out for the most part, and he pressed the line in camp. This is what Rod Brind'amour said. He's an 18-year-old, and he's got a really bright future. He's very competitive. That's what I liked. For all intents and purposes, he really doesn't know how to play at this level because he shouldn't. He's all over the place, and obviously the language barrier is not optimal for him, of course, with him being Russian. But I thought he didn't back down one bit, and for a young kid, that's impressive. That's what stood out. He's not backing down. It's obviously a skill set that he has and will translate. He's not ready, but if that matures, we'll have something there, which makes sense. I mean, Ivan Radkin's 18. He just came off of winning the USHL title. It doesn't make sense to move him up that fast. So, like what me and Mike talked about last week, let these guys bake a little bit. If he has to go play in Chicago, that's fine. If they're going to think about sending him down to Charlottetown in the QMJHL, that's a possibility as well. But Ivan Radkin, for me, did kind of show out as well, so that's going to be very something to keep an eye on. But overall with the Hurricanes, I mean, when you look at where they're at right now, Bradly Nadeau showing out really well. Nikita Klopp still has a lot to prove because he didn't really have a great season last year in the German league. Justin Robitaille had a great year for the Chicago Wolves, so you see him take the next step. Can Gleb Triksov stay healthy next year? Can Felix Unger-Sorum take that next step, because they tried to play him at center last year, didn't really work out, but now he's back on the wing, and he looked very comfortable, from what we've seen throughout the preseason and training camp. And then what are you going to look at with Montgomery and Nystrom? 2 guys who are kind of looking at different aspects of where they're at in their development. So with the guys who got basically automatically assigned to Chicago, I think they're all on different levels of where they're at, but you kind of feel good about yourself with the fact that where the Hurricanes are at with where they draft, late first round, sometimes when I have a first round pick, but they're still finding gems, they're still finding good players. During the dark ages, you were just throwing these guys into the lineup because you needed players, because you weren't really successful. Now you're at the point where you're the Carolina Hurricanes. You have so many bodies, you just don't have the room to put these guys up there, and there's no point of rushing them. And that's the thing with Bradly Nadeau. Bradly Nadeau is amazing, but do you want to put him on the 4th line for 12 minutes a night? Or would you rather him be in Chicago getting 17 minutes a night? I think that's where the main thing is. If you're the Hurricanes, is putting these guys in the right spot. So while it stinks not seeing Nadeau up with the Hurricanes, it's just where are you going to put him? That's the big question, because a guy who's 20 years old, do you throw him in the top 6? I don't really think so. Do you put him with the Jordans? Maybe. But fourth line, I just don't see him benefiting being on a fourth line guy getting 11, 12 minutes a night when you could be a top line guy getting 17, 18, and you're still 20. Like, you still have a lot more room to grow. So that's kind of where you're at right now. And those are the 8 guys that were just automatically signed from the Wolves, don't have to go through waivers. That being said, who are the 5 guys that have to go through waivers? Well, stick around. We'll talk about that here in a second on a Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you, where you can take you can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever really touching a spreadsheet. How are you using Monarch Money? Well, if you're maximizing investments, increasing your saving rate, easily reviewing finances with your partner and or financial advisor, keeping a clear view of your financial wealth, and you go from week to week and long-term and so much more. So don't let the financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we talk about the 8 players that got automatically assigned to the Chicago Wolves. Did hear what Rod Brind'amour had to say about, Ivan Rybkin, also Bradly Nadeau. But who are the 5 players that have to go through waivers? Well, you have to wait for Noah Gunler, Tyson Jost, Josiah Slavin, Ryan Suzuki, and Gavin Bayreuther. So, and these guys have been placed on waivers for the purpose of being reassigned to Chicago. Now, what's different about these is the fact that a lot of these guys, depending on their age, how many games they've played in the NHL, or a mix of a few other things, they have to go through waivers. And unfortunately for a lot of these guys, they hit that age threshold where you have to go through waivers. That's just the name of the game and stuff like that. And of course, a little bit more, but there's a lot that goes into the CBA and the waiver claims and stuff like that. So when it comes to that, teams have until 2 p.m. Eastern the next day to potentially claim these guys. So those 5 players, because we saw when we were talking about the Tuesday show, we had to wait for Skylar Brind'amour and Ronan Seeley to go through waivers. They made it through waivers. No one claimed them. Now they're assigned to the Chicago Wolves. That's the same thing with these 5 guys of Gunler, Josiah Slavin, Jacob Slavin, Suzuki, and Bayreuther. They have to go through waivers, and other teams have until 2 p.m. to possibly claim them if they want to. If teams don't claim these guys, then they're going to Chicago. Done and done. Don't got to worry about it. No one claimed them. Then their purpose of being reassigned to Chicago has been reassigned to Chicago. So that's kind of where you're at with that. And when asking Rod Brind'amour about the large batch of these guys getting sent to Chicago, this is what he had to say. I thought for the most part, every one of them took steps forward, and that's what you should see. They were all pretty new to it last year, and now you can tell they're way more comfortable with everything that went on. Their play was better for the most part, too. I thought every one of them that we put in there was a little bit better than last year. That's what you need to see. You hope that they keep progressing, and you hope that we probably don't need them. At the end of the day, you don't want to have to rely on those guys, at least not yet or right now. I thought they all, for the most part, did a pretty good job. And that goes back to what I was saying in segment 1, is when you look at the Carolina Hurricanes before the Rod Brind'amour era, a lot of these guys were just getting thrown straight into the roster, figure it out as you go, and a lot of these guys' developments didn't go well. And that's why you see teams like the Hurricanes of the Dark Ages have to go for not the greatest veterans to have on a roster talent-wise, and you're having to massively overpay players to come to Carolina knowing that they're not really contenders. And then you're having to throw prospects into games that, frankly, they should have been given some time in the AHL. And that's kind of where you're at that time. Now with Carolina, and I see where Rod Brind'amour is coming from, is you don't have to dig super deep into the prospects to figure your roster out. You have the talent of guys as you got right now with your veterans, your middle in between the the young guys, your Blakes, Stankovens, Jarvis's, Nikishins, stuff like that, the 23 or younger guys. Then you got that middle ground of KK, Fetch, Aho. You're not talking like upper 20s or even I would say probably like the lower 30s, those type of guys, upper 20s. You're not you have that nice mix of the veteran presence, middle in between of the young guys and the veteran guys, your mid tiers in terms of age, and then you got your young guys. And I think that's where you're at with the Hurricanes, the fact that they have a roster that's built perfectly where you extended the window a lot longer. And that's why with Rod saying that is that you're not having to rely on so many of your prospects. That's why you can send 13 guys to Chicago. That's why you can send 8 guys outright on being assigned to the AHL. So that's kind of where you're at. And I think that's why I think Rod said it perfectly. It's, you want to see them get better, but you don't have to really rely on those guys. And that's kind of the thing. So now it's kind of like, okay, what's the next step for the Hurricanes where you're looking, okay, now you're down to 26 guys. What's the rest of this camp look like? And when asked, Rod Brind'amour said, we want to stay sharp. Obviously, we have the one preseason game left. It keeps getting better. It keeps getting better and dialing in certain areas for sure. Makes sense because as of right now, you're kind of just looking to see, okay, who is left on the roster, who is, pushing to make that 23-man roster. Because right now you have 3 goalies still left over. You still get your PTO of Giovanni Smith. You also got Charles Alexis Legault staying up a little bit longer too. And we'll talk more about all those guys in segment 3. But now with the fact, like I said, with these guys that are out on outright waivers, you have to wait and see if they go through the process. And hopefully, and I don't think any of these guys probably will get picked up. It'll be interesting because, like I said, we have between now, whenever you guys listen to this, and 2 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, things could possibly change, but hopefully none of them get moved on. But that's kind of where you're at right now. Now, all that being said, there were 2 guys that were officially released from the PTO contracts, Oliver Shillington and Kevin LeBanc. Now, Kevin LeBanc, I was really surprised about him because initially when we talked about PTOs, we had Giovanni Smith and Oliver Shillington. I didn't know if those guys were going to make the roster, make a lot of noise. Oliver Shillington was okay, wasn't much of a standout. Giovanni Smith was definitely a standout. Like we'll talk about more in segment 3. But Kevin LeBanc, he really surprised me. I thought that he might have had a shot to potentially get a contract. Now, it doesn't mean that he's not going to get one from the Hurricanes if they want to keep him. It's just they want to release him out of his PTO. Do they possibly sign him? Who knows? Does another team sign him because they thought he might have impressed? That's a possibility as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Kevin LeBanc. Like I said, I liked him. I thought he showed up pretty well, but unfortunately his PTO got released, and same thing for Shillington. That's why they cut the roster down to 26. That being said, with 26 guys left, you have 15 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 3 goaltenders. So now it just begs the question, okay, now you're looking at what? 1 defenseman, 1 goalie, 1 forward. So you're possibly looking at what? 14 forwards, 7 defensemen, and 2 goalies as your 23 going into the season. I could definitely see that being the case. You're looking at possibly 2 forwards of healthy extras. Maybe they go 13 forwards and you go with your defenseman. Do you stick with 8 defensemen just in case someone's not really ready to go yet? That's a possibility as well. Do you go with 3 goalies? It's very rare you go for 3 goalies, but has Kaden Primo done enough to make his case as well? So that's going to be a very interesting part of the fact that you got 26 guys. You're allowed 23 on the main roster, like I said, you have 15 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 3 goalies. You could take one from each, and you're done. But this could definitely change as well if they decide to go with 13 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 2 goalies. Only time will tell. So what guys are making the case to say, hey, I want to be part of this 23-man roster? Well, stick around. We'll talk about it here in a second on a Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes watching football even more exciting when you got a little something right on the action. Maybe you're watching the Panthers, the Eagles, the Chargers, the Bucks, whoever. You can add a little more excitement to all of that, even if it's for your actual team or maybe your fantasy team. Whether if you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we talked about the guys that were just assigned to the Chicago Wolves, didn't have to go through waivers. We talked about the 5 guys who have to go through waivers to hopefully get assigned to the Wolves. Now we're talking about the guys who are making their case to go from the 26-man to hopefully make the 23-man roster. One of the guys that were kind of early on talking about after the practice with Rod Brind'amour is Givani Smith. This is what Rod Brind'amour had to say about him sticking around with a few more days left of the camp and the preseason game. He's a guy trying to make a squad and showing what he can do. In the 4 games that he's played, he's done a pretty good job. There's no reason not to keep him around and give him another look. I mean, when you talk about a guy who scored a goal against the Florida Panthers, winning getting the puck off a battle in the dot, scoring it pretty quick off the faceoff, hey, you'll glad to take that. He's someone who's been in a lot of the scraps over the preseason. A couple fights already, sticking up for his teammates. Always in the middle of get-togethers and stuff like that. Probably, try and trade some, food recipes. Maybe getting some, requesting to get some Halloween candy for other teams. Stuff like that. Just common, normal talk when guys get together in the middle of a hockey game. But he's definitely shown a lot of grit, a lot of fight, and a lot of stand-up for his teammates. And I said it the other night that when they were playing Nashville is Givani Smith, to me, is giving himself an opportunity to get a contract with the Carolina Hurricanes. I think he's almost playing his way into one. That's why I think out of the 3 PTO guys, he's the only one that's really left, and he's one of those guys that is still part of the 26 trying to fight for the 23. We saw Tyson Jost get, possibly sent down to Chicago. You have 15 forwards as of right now. If the Hurricanes want to be like, if we're just taking 1 forward, 1 defenseman, and 1 goalie off, and there's our 26 to 23, does Givani Smith make that case to be that 14th forward on the Hurricanes roster with Mark Jankowski? Because Mark Jankowski is going to probably be on the roster, no doubt. So Mark Jankowski is probably your 13th. Does Givani Smith become your 14th? That'll be the big question. But he's definitely shown up pretty well for the Hurricanes in terms of that aspect. Now, another guy that's still sticking around for the Hurricanes is Charles Alexis Legault. And he's right now on board as the 8th defenseman. When asked, Brind'amour said, I thought he had a good camp, and we needed an extra defenseman with the uncertainty of whether guys are going to practice or not. I feel like he deserved to be sticking around with the big group. That says a lot for where Charles Alexis Legault is right now compared to last year. Last year, I thought he was fine. Had a good season with the Wolves, taking that next step. You heard me say going into the prospect showcase, he's someone to watch out for. He played well there. He's played well. He's done well at camp. And he's done really well within the preseason games as well. And even the guys, that does Canes prospects, Nick and Matt, they've been talking about him a lot too. And you talk to Walt Ruff, he's saying stuff about him too. And even Anastasios from the defense coach in Chicago, he's been loving what he's been doing as well. So I think with all of that, I think Legault's really put himself into a spot where, we haven't seen K'Andre Miller at all in the preseason. Is he going to be ready for opening night? That's the question, because we haven't really heard any updates about him. Jalen Chatfield's still out, Slavin's still out, but all signs point that these guys will probably be ready for opening night. Now, if Miller isn't really ready, and if the Hurricanes feel like that they can throw a right-hand shot of Legault into the main roster for opening night, there's your balance of left and right defense, because now you don't have to move a Shane Gostisbehere to the right side on his offhand. You could still probably go in the case of probably a Slavin, Gostisbehere, Nikishin on your left, and then you got to figure, okay, who's on your right side? Is it, Walker, Chatfield, Legault, or does Nikishin move up with Chatfield, and then is it Ghost with Legault? Possibly. Or it's probably a chance where maybe they still throw Mike Riley in as your sixth defenseman, and maybe Legault is your seventh. Personally, I think if you're the Carolina Hurricanes and you keep Charles Alexis Legault for your 23-man roster, he's your right shot defenseman. I've been saying for the last few days, you guys have heard me say on the podcast, he's probably your number one right shot defenseman you bring up from Chicago. So if he makes the main roster for opening night, I say just put him in as your sixth defenseman, because you get 3 left, 3 right, boom, there you go. There's your even squad, and no one has to play on their offhand, whether if it's Gostisbehere or Mike Riley. And Mike Riley's not a bad guy to have as your 7th defenseman just in case. But if you're putting Legault into the roster for opening night, I think you play him. That just makes more sense to me if you do that. But I'm not Tim Gleason, I'm not Rod Brind'amour. But that's just what I think. If you want to bring up a right shot defenseman as your 8th guy, if Miller's not really ready to go, then put your right shot defenseman in. Why not? It just makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of where you're looking at in terms of that aspect. The fact you got Giovanni Smith still there, fighting for a spot. Alexis Legault is still there. Legault's fighting for a spot. That's kind of what you're looking at right now. Also with the goalies, when they asked about Caden Primo, I think he's been solid. I had a good indication of what kind of goalie he was, but you never really know until you get him in there and see him firsthand. I thought he did a really solid job, and that's what we need out of that position. Very true. He has been pretty much lights out for the Hurricanes, making a lot of key saves, and has shown time and time again why he won 20 games last season with the Vol Rockets in the AHL. When you win 20-plus games and you lose less than 5 between regulation and shootout overtime losses, yeah, that speaks volumes, and he's got some AHL experience, so it makes sense why they're still keeping him up here, because they want to get some more looks out of him, because, hey, in case anything happens to your top 2 goalies, knock on wood, nothing does, you want to make sure this guy's ready, and so far he's definitely proven that. Now, the question has been asked to Brind'amour, does he plan on carrying 3 goalies? We haven't made any decisions on how that's going to go. I think that's all determined on the health and where everyone is at. So that being said, is Pyotr Kochetkov 100%? Because we haven't seen him at all of this preseason. Is he ready to go by opening night? That's a question. That's the thing that we're waiting for Slavin. Same thing we're waiting for Chatfield. Same thing we're waiting for Miller. Haven't really heard nothing about Pyotr Kochetkov yet. Who knows where that stands? So if he's not ready, hello, Caden Primo, you might be our backup goalie to start the season. So who really knows at that point? And like I said, I doubt they're going to run with if everyone's healthy. I don't see them running with 3 goalies. It is very rare to see that happening, and I just don't see it. So that's kind of where you're at right now. Giovanni Smith is fighting for a roster spot. Legault's fighting for a roster spot, and honestly, so is Primo. So if you need 3 guys to be on the outside looking in, those are your 3 guys. Because I said, if you're looking to remove a forward, remove a defenseman, or remove a goalie to go from 26 to 23, those are your 3 bubble guys right now fighting for a roster spot. So if they make it, who's coming out? That's the main thing. It'll definitely be interesting. We still got another few days until our last preseason game on Saturday against the Nashville Predators. After that, opening rosters have to be ready by Monday of next week. Then before we know it, next Thursday, 8 days away as of this recording of the podcast on October 1st, we are going to be only 8 days from the home and season opener for the Carolina Hurricanes against the New Jersey Devils. It's going to be very interesting over the next few days of how this roster is going to be shaken up from 26 to 23. But make sure to stay right here for Locked On Hurricanes, as we'll be covering all of that over the next few days. And also keep an eye out for me over at the Hockey Writers, as I'll be writing all about that as well. But until then, this will be the Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, where Steele Roden and Philip Livingston provide daily fantasy tips to give you the edge over your league mates, all while making you a smarter hockey fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you want to keep up with me, I'm a one true Zach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. Also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where if you click the link tree in my bios, you can find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. Make sure to check those out, because I've done a couple articles on all of the recent roster cuts for the Carolina Hurricanes, going from the few that they had down to 40, now down to 26. So make sure to go to thehockeywriters.com to find my articles on all of that. If you want to check out my other podcast, it's the Surgecast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss a show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy our Wednesday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.